The day had started like any other for Sarah. She awoke early, the smell of coffee filling the small apartment she had lived in for the past 3 years. It wasn't
Subscribe to my
a
YouTube
one-bedroom
channel.
unit
Share
in
it
the
with your
city,
friends
where the
and
rent was
comment your
affordable,
thoughts.
but not by much. The walls were cracked, and the floorboards creaked with every step she took. It was a far cry from the luxurious penthouses and office buildings she often dreamed about, but for now, it was her reality. Sarah worked as a receptionist at a small accounting firm, her desk cluttered with paperwork, her life full of routine. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. However, the monotony of her daily life left her feeling hollow, as though she was going through the motions, waiting for something more. She had never given much thought to the world outside her narrow circle, until today. By mid-afternoon, Sarah was running an errand during her lunch break. She didn't usually leave the office building for long, but something about the grey skies and the cold air called to her. Maybe it was the sense of urgency that she couldn't shake off, or perhaps it was just the need for something different. Whatever the reason, Sarah found herself walking through the bustling streets of downtown, her shoes clicking on the concrete as she made her way to the local market. The city was alive, filled with the noise of traffic, the hum of conversations, and the occasional honk of a car horn. But as Sarah walked past the storefronts and the throngs of people, she saw something that caught her attention. An older man sitting against a brick wall, his face gaunt and worn, his clothes tattered and stained. His presence seemed to absorb the energy around him, as though he existed outside the normal flow of life. She couldn't help but stop. The man's eyes met hers, and for a moment, neither of them moved. His gaze was tired, but there was something else in it, something deeper that she couldn't quite place. Sarah felt an unexpected surge of emotion, something between sorrow and empathy. She had seen homeless people before, but there was something about this man that stirred something inside her. Without thinking, she walked closer, reaching into her bag. Sarah had bought extra food for her lunch, just a sandwich and some fruit. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. She crouched down beside him, offering the food. The man blinked in surprise, his weary eyes taking in the gesture. His lips parted as though he wanted to speak, but no words came out. For a moment, Sarah just looked at him, unsure of what to say. She didn't know why she felt so compelled to help him, but something about his presence had shaken her, as though he was a reflection of the struggles she had long tried to avoid. "You're welcome," she said softly, her voice hesitant. I don't have much, but I thought maybe you could use this." The man's eyes softened, and for the first time since Sarah had approached him, he smiled. It wasn't a broad smile, but it was genuine, a faint glimmer of gratitude in the dim light of the street. He accepted the food, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for it. "Thank you," he muttered, his voice raspy but sincere. I don't know how to repay you," Sarah smiled back, feeling a lump form in her throat. She wanted to say something comforting, something that would ease the weight of the moment, but the words didn't come. Instead, she stood up, brushing off her knees. Before she could say anything else, a sleek black car pulled up beside them, the engine humming quietly as it came to a stop. Sarah didn't notice it at first, too absorbed in the moment she had just shared with the homeless man. But then she heard the car door open, the soft whoosh of air that accompanied someone stepping out. She turned, her heart skipping a beat, as a tall, well-dressed man in his mid-40s stepped onto the sidewalk. His appearance was sharp, the kind of look that screamed wealth and power. His dark suit gleamed in the fading light, and his polished shoes made a quiet clicking sound as he walked toward them. Sarah was taken aback. She didn't know who he was, but there was something about him that felt important. Maybe it was the way people on the street seemed to part for him as he walked past, or maybe it was the calm, assured presence he carried with him. Whatever it was, Sarah couldn't help but feel a flutter of curiosity. The man stopped just a few feet away from her, and his eyes, sharp, calculating, seemed to study her for a moment before they shifted to the homeless man beside her. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice smooth and confident. "I couldn't help but notice what you're doing, helping someone like him. It's rare to see kindness in this city." Sarah blinked, unsure of how to respond. I just wanted to help," she stammered. "It's not much, but—" The man raised a hand, cutting her off. "It's more than most would do," he said, "and that's exactly why I'm here. You see, I'm Richard Adams, CEO of Adams Enterprises." Sarah's mind briefly spun, the name hitting her like a jolt. Adams Enterprises. She had heard of it, of course. Who hadn't? It was a massive corporation, one of the most successful in the country, with connections that spanned across industries. To say that Richard Adams was a powerful man would be an understatement. But what was someone like him doing, standing on the street talking to her? "I've been watching you," he continued, his voice unwavering. "And I think you have potential. You're different from the others I've seen." "Watching me?" Sarah repeated, her voice tinged with confusion. "I don't understand." Richard's lips curled into a smile, almost as though he enjoyed the confusion in her voice. "I see more in you than you realize," he said, stepping closer. "You've been stuck in a life that doesn't suit you, but I can offer you something else, something better." Sarah felt her pulse quicken, uncertainty flooding her veins. What was he talking about? Why her? She was just an ordinary employee, nothing special. She didn't even know what kind of proposal a man like Richard Adams could possibly have for someone like her. "I'm not sure I understand," Sarah said slowly, her gaze flicking between Richard and the homeless man. "Why are you offering me anything? I'm just a receptionist. I don't—" Richard's eyes locked onto hers, intense and unblinking. "That's exactly why I'm offering you this. You have a heart. You care. And that's something rare in this world." He handed her a business card, its sleek design catching the light. The words, "Richard Adams and CEO, Adams Enterprises," were printed in bold letters. She took it automatically, feeling as though she were in some strange dream. "I'll be waiting for your answer," Richard said, his voice low but firm. "Think carefully, Sarah. This is a chance to change your life." Without another word, Richard turned and walked back to his car. He slid into the back seat with a casual motion, and the car door closed behind him. The engine roared to life, and the car sped off, disappearing into the busy city streets. Sarah stood frozen, the business card still in her hand, her mind spinning with questions. What had just happened? Why had he chosen her? And what was this proposal he was talking about? She glanced down at the homeless man beside her. He looked up at her with tired eyes, a slight smile still on his lips. "Seems like you just got a golden opportunity," he said quietly. Sarah didn't know how to respond. All she could do was stare at the business card in her hand, her thoughts racing. Her life had just taken a turn she hadn't seen coming, and she wasn't sure she was ready for it. But one thing was certain. She couldn't ignore it. Sarah couldn't shake the memory of Richard Adams as she made her way back to the office. The business card felt heavy in her pocket, and despite the bustling sounds of the city around her, her mind was filled with nothing but the words he had spoken. "Think carefully, Sarah. This is a chance to change your life." What had he meant by that? She had seen people like him on TV, read about his company in magazines, but never in her wildest dreams had she imagined one of the most influential men in the country would stop on a busy street just to talk to her. She wasn't important. She wasn't anyone special, or so she had always believed. Her mind raced as she walked back to the office, the cold air no longer biting but suffocating, as though the weight of the decision ahead of her was pressing down on her chest. She hadn't spoken much to the homeless man after Richard left, but his words had stayed with her. Seems like you just got a golden opportunity. She tried to convince herself that it was all a mistake. Maybe Richard had confused her with someone else. Maybe he was just giving his business card out to random people for some odd reason. But deep down, she knew this wasn't a coincidence. Richard Adams had seen something in her, something that made him want to offer her an opportunity she couldn't yet understand. Back at the office, she sat at her desk, trying to focus on the piles of paperwork that awaited her. But every time she looked down at the file in front of her, her thoughts wandered back to the man in the sleek car, to the offer that hung in the air, and to the uncertain future she suddenly found herself staring at. She reached for the business card again, holding it in her hand as though the weight of it would provide some clarity, but nothing, just silence. The office was buzzing with the usual chatter and phone calls, but to Sarah, everything felt distant. Her world had shifted in that brief encounter, and now she didn't know where she fit in anymore. As the day wore on, the decision gnawed at her. She needed answers. She needed to know what Richard had meant, what he saw in her, and what kind of proposal could possibly come from a man like him. That night, Sarah sat alone in her apartment, her small, dimly lit living room, a stark contrast to the luxurious world Richard must live in. She stared at the business card again. It seemed like an ordinary card, but in her hands it felt like a key to something she didn't understand. With a deep breath, she dialed the number printed on the card, her heart pounding in her chest. The phone rang once, twice, and then there was a click on the other end. "Hello, this is Richard Adams. How can I help you?" The voice was calm, professional, and yet it sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. She hadn't expected him to pick up himself. A part of her had hoped she would be directed to some assistant, someone who could soften the edge of what she was about to do. "Hello, Mr. Adams," Sarah began, her voice shaky. "This is Sarah. I met you earlier today on the street. You gave me your business card." There was a pause on the other end. "Ah, yes," Richard said, his voice warm, yet there was an undertone of something more. "I'm glad you called. I've been hoping you would." Sarah swallowed hard. I don't understand. Why me? Why did you stop? I'm just a receptionist. I'm nothing special." "Sarah," Richard interrupted, his tone suddenly sharp. "You are more than you think. I saw something in you today, something rare, and I believe you have the potential to do far more than you realize." "I don't even know what you're offering," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "What kind of opportunity could you be offering someone like me?" "There's no need to rush," Richard replied, his voice soothing but firm. "I'm offering you a chance to step into a world you've only seen from the outside, a chance to be part of something bigger. I've seen people like you before, people who are trapped in a life they don't want. You have a choice, Sarah. Stay where you are or take a risk, and let me show you what's possible." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. A risk? What was he asking? It didn't make sense. How could she, a receptionist in a small firm, be offered anything by someone like him? "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I want you to come to my office tomorrow morning," Richard said, his voice steady. "I'll explain everything there. We'll talk about what I can offer you, and you can decide if it's something you want to pursue. There's no pressure, Sarah, but I believe this is an opportunity you can't afford to ignore." The phone call ended with Richard giving her the address of his office. He assured her he would be waiting for her, and just like that, the line went dead. For the rest of the evening, Sarah couldn't do anything but stare at the phone in her hands. She had so many questions, she had so much doubt, but there was also a part of her that felt drawn to the idea of change, the idea that there was something out there beyond her ordinary life, something that could give her the purpose she had been searching for. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a knot in her stomach. She had spent the entire night tossing and turning, her mind filled with thoughts of Richard's words. Should she go? Should she risk everything on this strange offer? But in the end, her curiosity won out. She dressed quickly, keeping her movements mechanical. There was no turning back now. She had to know what Richard had in mind. She arrived at his office just after 9 in the morning. The building was towering, modern and intimidating. As she walked through the sleek glass doors, she couldn't help but feel out of place. The marble floors gleamed, and the air smelled of luxury. This wasn't her world. But maybe, just maybe, it could be. A receptionist greeted her as soon as she entered, her smile bright and professional. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "I'm here to see Mr. Adams," Sarah said, her voice trembling despite herself. The receptionist glanced at the computer screen before looking up with a smile. "He's expecting you. Right this way." Sarah followed the receptionist through the gleaming hallway, her footsteps echoing in the quiet. As they reached the door to Richard's office, the receptionist knocked lightly before opening the door. "Mr. Adams, your guest has arrived." "Thank you," Richard's voice called from inside. "You can leave us now." Sarah stepped into the office, her breath catching in her throat. Richard was standing by the window, his back to her. The office was pristine, decorated in rich tones of dark wood and soft leather, and from the floor-to-ceiling windows, the view of the city was breathtaking. "Sarah, it's good to see you again," Richard said, turning to face her with a warm smile. "Please have a seat." She hesitated for a moment before sitting down, the plush leather chair feeling foreign beneath her. The silence between them seemed to stretch for a moment, but then Richard's voice broke it. "I know this is all a lot to take in," he said, leaning forward. "But I want you to understand something. This isn't just an offer. It's a chance for you to make a real difference in your life and in the lives of others." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. What kind of difference? Richard smiled again, but this time there was something more to it. A hint of mystery, a glint in his eyes that suggested there was more to this story than she could possibly imagine. "You'll see soon enough," he said softly. "But first, I want to make sure you're ready. Are you willing to take the leap, Sarah, to trust me? Because once you do, there's no going back." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Sarah didn't know how to respond. But deep down, she knew that her life was about to change forever. Whether she was ready for it or not, Sarah sat in Richard Adams' office, the weight of his words pressing down on her chest. The city skyline outside the window seemed far away, the bustling streets below now a distant hum. Inside this sleek, corporate space, it felt as though time had slowed. Richard's question echoed in her mind, "Are you willing to take the leap?" Her heart raced, the excitement in her chest a mix of fear and curiosity. She had always dreamed of something more. She had always felt like she was meant for something bigger than the small, repetitive life she had, but to step into the unknown, to trust a man she barely knew. It was a leap she wasn't sure she was ready to take. Richard watched her carefully, his eyes never leaving hers. The silence between them felt heavy, laden with expectation. He was waiting for her answer, but the words felt stuck in Sarah's throat. How could she possibly make such a huge decision in a single moment? Was this really the opportunity of a lifetime, or was she being swept up in a fantasy? She cleared her throat, her voice shaky. "I don't even know what you're offering me. I don't understand what you want from me." Richard leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled in front of him as though he were contemplating something important. "Sarah, I'm not asking you to make a decision based on fear. I'm offering you the chance to change your life. This isn't just about money or success. It's about purpose. It's about stepping into a world where your actions can have an impact far beyond your wildest dreams." Her mind spun. She had always wanted to feel important, to have her life matter in a way that wasn't just about paying bills and surviving. But what Richard was saying, it felt too good to be true. No one ever got that kind of chance without strings attached. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why choose someone like me? I'm just a receptionist." Richard smiled, and for a moment Sarah saw a flicker of something more, something that almost seemed to come from a deeper place. "That's the thing, Sarah. I see potential in you. You're not just a receptionist. You're someone who cares. That's rare. I've worked with so many people over the years, people who have everything, money, success, but they don't have heart. You do." Sarah felt a strange warmth at his words, but she wasn't sure whether to trust them. People had told her she was special before, but those words had always come from places she was eager to escape. From family members who had hoped she would go further, from friends who envied her potential but had never seen the real struggles she faced. "I don't know," she said slowly, her mind wrestling with the conflict inside her. "This sounds too perfect. I don't understand what you want from me." Richard's eyes softened. "I'm not asking for anything in return, not yet. But I need someone who isn't afraid to stand up, to take a risk, and who isn't afraid to make a difference in the world. That's what I want. Someone who isn't afraid to trust." Sarah stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deception, but there was nothing. His expression was open, calm. There was no hidden agenda. At least, that's what it appeared like. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "What exactly is this world you're talking about?" she asked, her voice steady despite the doubts racing through her mind. Richard leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "I want you to help me with something that's bigger than both of us. I'm working on a project, a new initiative that will change the way people see the world. It's not about making money. Well, it's not just about that. It's about helping those who don't have a voice, giving them a chance to rise above their circumstances. And I need someone like you, someone with empathy, with real-world experience, to help me make it happen." Sarah blinked, her mind reeling. A project? He wasn't offering her a typical job. This wasn't about working in an office, climbing the corporate ladder. It sounded bigger, more dangerous, and she was more afraid than she had ever been. Richard continued, sensing her hesitation. "It's a project that will require a lot of your time, your trust, and your courage. You'll be working alongside some of the most powerful people in the world, but also with those who have nothing, who need your help the most. The question is, are you willing to get your hands dirty, to get involved in something that could change the lives of thousands of people?" The weight of his words hit Sarah like a ton of bricks. The thought of working with people who had nothing, those who had been forgotten by society, it stirred something deep inside her. But there was still fear. Fear of stepping into a world she didn't understand, of losing herself in something so much bigger than she had ever known. I don't know," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm not sure I'm the right person for this. I don't have the experience. I've never worked on something like this." Richard's smile was patient. "You don't need experience. You just need heart. That's what I'm offering you, Sarah. A chance to tap into your potential, to work alongside people who believe in the same things you do." 1,000 thoughts collided in Sarah's mind. Her life had been small, predictable. This opportunity, if it was even real, was terrifying. But it was also the only thing that had ever made her feel alive, that had ever made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't destined to stay in her little corner of the world forever. She looked down at her hands, unsure of what to do next. Her palms were sweaty, her thoughts muddled. She had no idea what to expect from this project, but Richard's words had struck a chord in her. He saw something in her that no one else had. Could she really take a chance on him? On this? "I need to think about it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Richard nodded as though he had been expecting this. "Take your time, but don't take too long, Sarah. This opportunity won't wait forever." The words hung in the air as Sarah stood up, her mind racing. Richard didn't stop her as she made her way to the door. "Thank you for your time," she said, her voice shaky but polite. "Think about it," Richard called after her, his voice soft. "The world needs people like you. Don't let fear hold you back." The door closed behind her, and as she stepped out of his office, the overwhelming weight of the decision ahead of her seemed to crash down on her like a wave. She had never felt more alone, more uncertain, but at the same time, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was the moment her life had been waiting for. Outside, the city was as noisy and chaotic as ever. People rushed by, oblivious to her internal turmoil. She could hear the faint hum of traffic, the sound of cars honking, the chatter of people around her. But none of it mattered. She was on the edge of something bigger than herself, and she had no idea how to step into it. For the first time in a long time, she didn't know what the right answer was. She didn't know if this was the opportunity of a lifetime or the biggest mistake she would ever make. But one thing was certain: she was about to make a choice that would change everything. The days that followed Sarah's meeting with Richard Adams felt like an eternity. Each moment was weighed down by the uncertainty of the choice ahead of her. She had never felt this torn in her life. On one hand, she had a comfortable, predictable existence, work that was stable, people she knew, a life she had carved out for herself. But on the other hand, Richard had offered her something completely different, a chance to step into a world she had never even imagined, a world where she could have power, influence, and the opportunity to make a real difference. But what did that truly mean? She spent the following days in a daze, her mind constantly drifting back to his words, "I'm offering you the chance to change your life." The promise echoed in her ears, but so did the warning. This opportunity won't wait forever. Sarah had never been one for risks. She had played it safe her entire life. Growing up, her parents had taught her the value of security, of having a steady job, of being careful with money, of sticking to what was known. But now, with Richard's offer hanging over her, it felt like everything she had ever known was about to be uprooted. That evening, as the sun began to set, Sarah found herself walking down the familiar path back to her apartment. The cool evening air did nothing to calm the storm swirling in her mind. She could see the lights flickering on in the windows of nearby buildings, the hum of the city's pulse all around her. But in the midst of the chaos, she felt strangely isolated, alone with her thoughts, alone with her fear. Her footsteps echoed in the empty streets as she approached the door of her apartment building. It was the same building she had called home. For years, the one that felt safe, if a little too small for her growing sense of dissatisfaction. But now, with the weight of her decision hanging over her, everything felt different. Nothing felt the same anymore. As she stepped inside and made her way to her apartment, Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her heart skipping. A beat when she saw Richard's name on the screen. Richard Adams, the man who had somehow made her question everything about her life. She took a deep breath and answered the call. "Sarah." Richard's voice was warm, but there was an edge to it. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "No, not at all," Sarah replied, trying to steady her breathing. "I was just thinking." "Good. I wanted to check in with you. Have you made a decision?" The question hit her like a wave, crashing over her thoughts, forcing her to confront everything she had been avoiding. She had been delaying this moment, hoping the answer would somehow come to her on its own. But here it was, staring her in the face. I don't know," Sarah said, her voice shaky. "I'm not sure I'm ready. I don't know if I can take that kind of leap. It's so much." "I understand," Richard said gently. "But you need to understand something, Sarah. Opportunities like this don't come around often. It's not about being ready. It's about having the courage to step into something bigger than yourself, to make a difference. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his words. She had always thought of herself as someone who was just ordinary, just another person working hard to get by. The thought that she could do something more, something impactful, it felt both exhilarating and terrifying. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can do it. I've never taken risks before." "You don't have to do it alone," Richard reassured her. "I'll be with you every step of the way. But I need someone with heart, someone who is willing to take that first step into the unknown, and I believe that's you." The words hung in the air as Sarah processed them. Was she really that person? Did she have what it took to take a chance? On herself? "Think of it this way, Sarah," Richard continued, his voice softer now. "This is your moment. The world doesn't wait for people. You make your own path, and sometimes you have to take a leap, even when the ground beneath you isn't clear. But I promise you, if you trust me, you'll land somewhere you never imagined." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The enormity of what he was offering, of what she was about to decide, was overwhelming. But there was something else too. The pull, the undeniable feeling that this was the moment she had been waiting for. The chance to do something that mattered. I'll do it," she said, her voice steady now. "I'll take the leap." "Good," Richard's voice was full of approval. "I knew you would. I'll send you the details. You're going to be part of something incredible, Sarah. Trust me, you won't regret it." The call ended, and Sarah stood there, the phone still pressed to her ear. The decision had been made, and just like that, everything had changed. The first step. The next morning, Sarah awoke with a sense of anticipation that both exhilarated and terrified her. She had made her choice. There was no turning back now. As she got ready for the day, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. Everything she had known, her job, her routine, her life, was about to be turned upside down. By the time she arrived at her desk at the office, she had already received an email from Richard outlining the details of what was to come. She opened it with trembling hands, her eyes scanning the text quickly. "Congratulations, Sarah. I'm excited to have you on board. Your first task will be a meeting with my team tomorrow at 10 a.m. This is where we begin. Everything starts now." Sarah read the email again, her mind racing. Her first task. What did that even mean? She had no idea what she was walking into, but she was committed now. She couldn't back out, not when she had already taken that first step. As the day went on, Sarah found it harder to focus. Her thoughts were scattered, her mind consumed by the unknown. She kept thinking about the people she would meet, the tasks she would be given. Would she be able to handle it? Was she really ready to dive into a world so different from her own? By the time she left the office that evening, her stomach was in knots. She walked home with a sense of dread, the city streets once again feeling foreign to her. Everything had changed, but was it for the better? That night she barely slept. Her mind was filled with possibilities, with the unknown. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Richard's face, his words echoing in her mind. "The world doesn't wait for people. You make your own path." The meeting. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the meeting location. An exclusive building downtown that she had passed by countless times but had never thought she would step into. The sleek glass doors opened automatically as she approached, and she walked inside feeling like an intruder. The lobby was filled with polished marble floors, tall pillars, and sculptures that looked like they belonged in a museum. She had never felt so out of place. A receptionist greeted her with a smile. "You must be Sarah. Mr. Adams is expecting you. Please follow me." Sarah followed the woman through the expansive corridors, her footsteps echoing as she walked. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest. What was she about to step into? What did Richard's team look like? Was she really prepared for this? They stopped outside a set of double doors. The receptionist knocked once before opening the door and stepping aside. Inside, Sarah saw a group of well-dressed people sitting around a large conference table. Richard was at the head of the table, his sharp eyes immediately meeting hers as she entered. He smiled and motioned for her to sit. "Everyone, this is Sarah," Richard said, his voice filled with warmth. "She'll be joining us today. Sarah, I'd like you to meet my team." The room went quiet as Sarah walked to the chair at the table. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her, but she forced herself to sit with confidence. She was here. She had made the decision, and now it was time to see where it would lead. Richard began speaking, outlining the details of their latest project, a plan to help marginalized communities, providing resources and support to those in need. It was ambitious, and the stakes were high. Sarah listened intently, trying to absorb everything, but her mind kept returning to one question: what was her role in all of this? "Sarah," Richard said, breaking her thoughts, "you'll be working closely with James and Emma. They'll help you get started." James, a tall man with sharp features, nodded at her, while Emma, a woman with dark hair and a calm demeanor, smiled reassuringly. "We're glad to have you on board," James said. "We've been needing someone with your skill set." Skill set? Sarah hadn't even known what her skill set was until a few days ago. But she nodded, unsure of what else to do, and so the meeting began. As Richard outlined the next steps, Sarah realized something. This wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be a smooth ride, but it was the beginning of something bigger than she could have imagined. She had made her choice, and now she had to prove that it was the right one. The following weeks were a blur of meetings, late nights, and an overwhelming amount of information. Sarah had stepped into a world she hadn't known existed, a world where decisions weren't just about making money or climbing the corporate ladder. This was about making a difference, sure, but also about navigating complexities and challenges that stretched far beyond her understanding. Her role in the project wasn't clearly defined at first. Richard had promised her that she would be working alongside Emma and James, and she quickly realized that her involvement was meant to bridge the gap between the team and the communities they were trying to reach. They were creating a program that would provide support for homeless shelters, food distribution, job placement, and rehabilitation for those struggling with addiction. It was a massive undertaking, and Sarah was meant to be the liaison between the ground-level workers and the higher-ups, people who had the power to make things happen. But the more Sarah got involved, the more she realized how much she didn't. No, the pressure was mounting, and every decision seemed to carry more weight than the last. The team was competent, but the expectations on them were immense, and the resources, despite being plentiful, were spread thin. It felt as though they were constantly fighting an uphill battle, each small victory only serving to highlight how much more there was to do. Sarah often found herself staying late at the office, going over reports and data, trying to make sense of what was happening on the ground. James and Emma were helpful, but they were focused on their specific areas, and Sarah quickly learned that she couldn't rely on them to do everything. The burden of responsibility was hers alone, and as time passed, she found herself questioning if she was up for the challenge. The first major setback was late one evening, just a few weeks into the project, when Sarah sat in the conference room, staring at the screen of her laptop. The team had just returned from a field visit where they had met with a group of shelter directors to discuss the next phase of the initiative. The meeting had been a disaster. Despite all their efforts, the shelters weren't equipped to handle the sheer number of people that the program was supposed to serve. Resources were being stretched to their limit, and there were complaints about lack of training, lack of coordination, and even accusations that the money earmarked for the project was being mismanaged. Sarah had tried to smooth things over during the meeting, but the tension in the room had been palpable. As soon as they left the shelter, she had heard the whispers from the other team members. "This isn't working. We're not ready. Maybe we should pull back." But pulling back wasn't an option, not for Richard, not for the people depending on this initiative. Sarah knew that she couldn't let doubt take root. Yet, as the minutes ticked by, it felt like the weight of the project was pressing down on her chest. She stared at the email from the director of the largest shelter in the city. The email was filled with demands for immediate changes and a thinly veiled threat that they would pull out of the program if things didn't improve. "This is a disaster," Sarah muttered under her breath, running a hand through her hair. She felt the exhaustion that had been building over the weeks begin to catch up with her. The endless meetings, the late-night phone calls, the constant pressure to deliver results. It was taking its toll. But the real question now was, how could they fix this? Just then her phone buzzed. It was a message from Richard. "I need to see you. Meet me at the office in an hour." Sarah's heart sank. She knew what this meant. She had hoped that the issues at the shelter were just bumps in the road, but now it seemed like Richard wanted to address things head-on. He wasn't going to let this slip by. An hour later, Sarah was sitting across from Richard in his office, the city lights flickering in the distance. Richard was calm, composed, as always. He didn't seem to be rattled by the chaos that had unfolded earlier in the day. Instead, he was focused, his gaze fixed on her as though he were assessing her very soul. "I've been hearing some concerning things about the shelter program," Richard said, his voice low but firm. "Tell me what happened, Sarah." The words caught in her throat. She had tried to keep the project on track, tried to hold things together, but now she had to admit that it wasn't going as planned. "I don't know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've tried everything. The shelter directors don't feel like they're getting the support they need, and we don't have enough staff or resources to make the program effective." Richard was silent for a moment, studying her with piercing eyes. Finally he spoke. "You're taking this personally," he said. "You can't. This is bigger than any one person. You're not responsible for the failures. You're responsible for finding the solutions. And right now, the solution is clear. We need to regroup, re-evaluate, and come up with a new strategy." Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The weight of his words settled over her, and the pressure to succeed began to feel like a physical burden. Richard's calmness only seemed to highlight her own panic. "I know what you're capable of, Sarah," Richard continued, his voice now more gentle. "You've been doing a good job, but you're new to this. You're stepping into a role that requires a level of resilience that not everyone possesses. Do you have the resilience to see this through?" Sarah swallowed hard. His words were both a challenge and a reassurance. The fear that had been gnawing at her was still there, but something inside her shifted. She had been doubting herself, questioning if she was truly up for this, but Richard was right. She had to find a solution, not wallow in the problem. "Do," she said, her voice steady for the first time in days. "I'll fix it." Richard's eyes softened just for a moment. "Good. Now, let's get to work." The turning point in the following days, Sarah threw herself into the project. With renewed determination, she spent hours on the phone with shelter directors, reworking the budget and organizing new training programs for the staff. It wasn't easy, but slowly, the pieces began to fall into place. She was no longer just reacting to the problems. She was proactively solving them. The team began to rally around her. James and Emma, who had been distant at times, now saw her as a leader. The shelters started to see the changes they had been promised. It was a slow process, but it was progress. One evening, after another long day of meetings and calls, Sarah found herself in Richard's office again. This time, there was no tension in the air, just a quiet sense of accomplishment. Richard was at his desk reviewing some papers, but when he saw her enter, he smiled. "Good job, Sarah. I've been hearing good things about your work." "Thank you," she said, feeling a wave of pride wash over her. "We're getting there. It's been hard, but we're making progress." Richard nodded, his expression thoughtful. "This is what I wanted to see. You've got the drive, the resilience, and the heart. I knew you could do it." Sarah smiled, but something about Richard's words made her pause. There was something deeper in what he was saying, something that felt more personal, but she didn't have time to think about it. There was still so much work to be done. As Sarah left the office that evening, her steps felt lighter. She had faced her doubts, overcome her fears, and begun to see the fruits of her labor. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer the same person who had walked into Richard's office weeks ago. She had found her strength, and now she would stop at nothing to see this project succeed. The weeks following Sarah's confrontation with Richard Adams were nothing short of transformative. Every moment was filled with tension, expectation, and moments of growth she never could have anticipated. The project, which had once seemed like an impossible mountain, was now beginning to feel like something within reach. She had learned how to lead, how to navigate the complexities of the initiative, and most importantly, how to trust her own instincts. But she also learned the true cost of ambition. As the project gained traction, the pressure increased. The initiative had grown beyond its original scope, with new partnerships, higher stakes, and increased scrutiny from all sides. The media had caught wind of the program, and soon reporters were showing up at the shelters, wanting to see the progress for themselves. Sarah had seen this kind of attention before, the way people could shift from skeptical to demanding. It had happened with Richard's company before, and now it was happening with her. Everyone wanted answers, results, and quick fixes. The deeper she got into this world, the more she realized that the stakes were not just about success, they were about survival. But there was one thing Sarah couldn't shake: Richard. The growing distances. The weeks went on. Sarah found herself spending more and more time with Richard. He had become both a mentor and a constant presence in her life. They would meet after hours, discussing strategy, addressing concerns, and planning for the next big push. There was a part of Sarah that felt grateful for his guidance, but another part of her, the part she had kept buried for so long, began to wonder if there was something more to their relationship. Richard's encouragement, his intense focus on her, his subtle compliments, they all added up to something that felt like more than just professional admiration. It was on one particularly late evening when it happened. Sarah had stayed behind to finalize a report on the impact of the shelter program. Richard had asked her to stay late, as he often did, to discuss the program's progress. The office was empty, the city outside barely visible through the windows, save for the distant glow of streetlights. She was working at her desk when Richard walked into the room, his steps soft against the polished floor. He stopped by her desk, his expression serious. "Sarah," he began, his voice lower than usual, "we need to talk." She looked up, her heart skipping a beat. Something in his tone told her that this was more than just a routine conversation. "About the project?" she asked, trying to sound calm. "No," Richard replied, taking a seat next to her desk. "About you. About what you've become." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" Richard looked at her for a long moment before answering. "You've changed, Sarah. You're no longer just the woman who walked into my office a few months ago. You're more. You've found your place in this world." His words felt like a compliment, but there was an intensity behind them that made her uneasy. She knew that he was a man of great ambition, a man who expected nothing less than perfection from those around him. But hearing this from him, this sudden acknowledgement of her growth, felt like something else entirely. I've had a lot of support, Sarah said quietly, trying to downplay her growing sense of discomfort. I've had you, the team. I couldn't have done it without them. Richard's eyes softened, but his expression didn't change. I've watched you, Sarah. I've watched you grow, struggle, and rise to the challenge. You're ready for something more now. You've earned it. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. She didn't know what Richard meant by something more, but the way he was looking at her made her feel exposed. His words, his gaze, it all seemed to carry a weight that she wasn't ready to understand. Before she could respond, Richard stood up and walked toward the window, his back to her. You have the potential to be one of the greatest leaders of this generation, Sarah. But there's a price to pay for that kind of success. She stood up, walking toward him cautiously. What do you mean? Richard turned to face her, his eyes intense. The world doesn't reward kindness, Sarah. It rewards power, influence, those who make things happen. And you, my dear, are on the verge of becoming someone who could change the course of history. Sarah's heart raced. She had always known that ambition came at a cost, but this felt different. There was something in his words that made her question everything she had worked for. Was she really doing this for the right reasons? Or was she becoming part of a system she didn't fully understand? You're saying... She trailed off, her voice shaky. You're saying I need to become like you. Richard smiled, but there was something almost predatory in his expression. I'm saying you need to embrace your power, the power to make decisions, to control outcomes. You need to stop asking for permission, Sarah. You need to take what's yours. Her stomach twisted. The air in the room suddenly felt thick, oppressive. Sarah had spent her whole life believing that hard work, empathy, and kindness were enough to change the world. But Richard was telling her that these ideals, these values, wouldn't be enough. The world didn't care about them. The world cared about power, influence. For the first time, Sarah understood what Richard truly wanted from her. It wasn't just about the project. It wasn't just about helping people. It was about her becoming a part of his world, his ambitious, cutthroat world, where compassion was secondary to success. The revelation. The next few days were a whirlwind. Sarah tried to push the conversation out of her mind, to focus on the progress they were making with the shelters, with the community programs. But Richard's words lingered in the back of her mind, gnawing at her thoughts. She began to see things differently. Richard wasn't the same man who had first extended the offer to her. He was a man who had built his empire on his terms, who saw everything, every person, every project as a means to an end, and now she was a part of that. Sarah tried to justify her involvement. After all, the program was doing good. It was helping people, changing lives. But as she watched Richard make decisions that seemed increasingly impersonal, cutting corners, shifting resources, pushing the limits of what was ethical, she began to question whether her own role in this was still in line with her values. One evening, after a particularly intense meeting with Richard's senior executives, Sarah sat alone in her office. The lights were dim, and the city outside was bathed in a soft amber glow. Her thoughts were scattered, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of everything she had learned. It was then that Emma walked into the room. "Sarah, you okay?" Emma asked, her tone soft. She had always been the one person Sarah could rely on for an honest conversation, and Sarah could see the concern in her eyes. "I don't know," Sarah replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was making a difference. But now, I'm not so sure." Emma sat down beside her, her gaze gentle. "What's going on?" Sarah hesitated, trying to find the words. "Richard, he's changed. And now I'm starting to wonder if I've changed too. I don't know if I can keep doing this. I don't know if this is who I want to be." Emma's silence was heavy, and for a moment Sarah thought she might have lost her. But then Emma spoke. Sometimes the hardest thing is realizing that the path you're on isn't the one you thought it was. It's okay to question it, Sarah. It's okay to step back and decide if this is really what you want. Sarah looked at her, her heart aching. But what about the project? What about the people we're helping? Emma smiled softly. You can help people without losing yourself in the process. You can do good without sacrificing everything that makes you who you are. Sarah felt tears well in her eyes. She had worked so hard for this, but she couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease in her chest. She wasn't sure what the future held anymore, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't continue down this path if it meant losing herself in the process. The final decision. The decision was clear now. The program was important, the work was necessary, but at what cost? Sarah had been a part of something much bigger than herself, but she realized that the cost of continuing was too high. She didn't know exactly what the future would look like, but she knew she had to walk away from Richard, from the project, and from a world that had been built on the very principles she had come to reject. The next morning, Sarah met with Richard in his office. He looked at her with the same calculating eyes, but this time there was no warmth, only the cold, hard reality of the decisions they had both made. I'm leaving, Sarah said quietly, her voice steady. Richard's expression didn't change, but Sarah saw a flicker of something, disappointment, annoyance. She couldn't tell. You're making a mistake, he said flatly. I'm not making a mistake, Sarah replied, her voice firm. I've realized that I can still make a difference, but I can't do it this way. I won't be a part of something that compromises my values. Richard stood up, walking to the window, his back to her. For a long moment there was silence between them. Then he turned and looked at her, his eyes hard. Good luck, Sarah, he said, his voice cold. You'll need it. And with that, Sarah walked out of the office, out of the world she had entered, and into an uncertain future. But as she stepped out into the city, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. She had found her way back to herself. The end.